What is up, everybody? How's it going? So we're going to go ahead and get started pretty quick. We got a tight schedule tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and just get the ball rolling. We're going to get this Nmap scan started off, and then we're going to go ahead and talk while that's running. How's it going, Hoodlum and Davey? Nice to see you guys. Pancake, nice to see you again. So tonight we're going to be attacking active on HackTheBox. So if you've got a HackTheBox VIP subscription, please do. I encourage you to follow along. If not, this is still should be an informative lesson for you. So the address we are attacking tonight is going to be .100. So our syntax is going to look something like this. We're going to do a speed of T4, similar to last week. We're going to go ahead and set a -A for all, -P- for all ports. And then we're going to say 10.10.10.100. So let's kick this thing off. It's going to take a couple minutes. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at a box called active. Now, active is important, and I asked you guys last week to upvote it for us, and you guys did just that. I think it was like the top box in upvotes, so I hope we had a part in that. So we're going to be looking at Active Directory, and like a lot of people ask me, what would be the one thing I could study if I'm going to study pen testing? And my answer is always, well, if you have a good knowledge, then I would work on your Active Directory skills, because there's 90% of the Fortune 500 uses some sort of Active Directory or a full Active Directory environment. So in order to know some of these attacks would be really, really good for you. So I'm going to demonstrate a couple. This is one of the more realistic boxes on HackTheBox. A lot of times they're capture the flag-esque. This one is more realistic, at least in the attack sense. So we're going to do GPP tonight, and we're going to do Kerberos, and we'll talk about what those are. So, still waiting on the scan. Looks like it's going slow. We could be actually slowing it down together. Is Active Directory Windows machine, or as active a Windows machine? Yes, it is. It's a Windows machine running, I don't remember what server. It's running a server. It's acting as a domain controller, as if it were Active Directory. And I did see the post by him. It was pretty good. It's spot on a lot of the tools that we use. Especially, I think there was Responder was in there. NTP Relay X is another one that we use for SMB signing. We're going to talk about SMB signing tonight as well. I think he had MITM6 in there. It's another big one. So as in terms of like an introductory blog, I think that was pretty spot on. There's another one while we wait. We can actually just go ahead and Google this. So we're going to Google, what is it called? It's called How I Got Domain Admin Before Lunch. I think it's something like that. Top 5 ways I got domain admin on your internal network before lunch. So this is a really good one. Let me see if I could just copy and paste this over for you guys. So that one, I like that one. This is a lot of what you'll see. Like this NetBIOS LLMNR, really, really good. This is probably the thing I start off first before I even start scanning, like Nmap or Nessus, any of that. Because Nmap and Nessus, if you're scanning, they're going to cause a lot of traffic. And that traffic, it benefits us if we're sitting as a man in the middle and doing poisoning. So this NetBIOS, this LLMNR, some of these hashes are really, really easy. So this is probably the biggest one. Good thing it's pointed out first. If you scroll through, relay attacks are huge as well if SMB signing is off. Let's see what else he's got in here. MS1710, huge. We were going to do a machine called Blue, but we actually got active in, so we don't have to focus on that. Kerberos, which we're going to touch on tonight. MITM6 is another big one. So yeah, this is a really good article. And yeah, pen testing isn't always about getting domain admin. Like, that's your goal a lot of the time. Like, you feel like that should be your goal, but still accessing vulnerabilities and getting sensitive data, right? So, like, when you're talking, like, especially like if you're doing like red team ops, like if somebody's hiring you to hack into their systems, a lot of times they don't care if you get domain admin. They care more if you're getting that sensitive data, that research information, or whatever it is that they keep close, right? That's proprietary to them. So a lot of times domain admin has nothing to do with that. Let's see how we're doing on this scan while we wait. Still says 3 minutes. That's okay. So that's a really good one. In other terms of blogs, AD security, of course, is really good. We say adsecurity.org is really, really good. Harmjoy is fantastic. So this guy is awesome. His blog is awesome. I'll post those as well. Yeah, no problem, Tinfoil. I appreciate that. And then here's Harmjoy. Very, very, very smart people. Way above my head a lot of the times. So just things to try to take in and soak in. HackTheBox also has 2 Active Directory focused paid, like they're pro labs. If you go into here, you've got Rasta Labs and you've got Offshore. I've heard really good things about Offshore. I've heard good things about Rasta Labs too. Offshore is more primarily focused on a real pen test. I believe his name is Ben, that Ben did. So it's really pretty good. Parrot OS partners with HackTheBox. Are you the Parrot guy from Reddit? I've got suspicions now. Let's see where we're at. We got about 2 minutes left. You are. Hey, look at you. Yeah, send me that link if you haven't already. I got my phone on mute right now, but I'd be interested in seeing that. So yeah, very good resources here. And tonight we're going to be focusing on GPP. Hey Jeff, how's it going, man? Glad to have you here. So GPP is an older vulnerability, but it's still around, and we're going to talk about why it's important and even why on a blue team it might be important. So there's some things that we've done on the blue side to try to catch attackers. So honeypotting or canaries with GPP is a really easy win. So it's easy win on both sides. And then when we talk about Kerberosing, it's something that you should attempt pretty much on every single assessment. You saw the top 5 before lunch. That's pretty spot on. So very good stuff. And we're going to kind of go into detail depending on how much time we have. I know last week we kind of like really went into detail on what we would call a vulnerability. This week I really want to focus on a couple of these, like important Active Directory attacks. And if we get into the vulnerabilities, we still have time because the buffer overflow is going to take a little bit of time. So we definitely are going to be a little on the crunch tonight, but we should be able to get to everything. Almost there on this one. No HackTheBox in beers tonight, Jeff? Is that Tuesdays and Thursdays? Oh, we're getting close. Tomorrow night? Nice. I'm going to have to make it out for one of those. They're coming, Mr. Deviant. They're coming. On our second scan here. Almost done. Server scan. In terms of other Active Directory resources while we talk, there are the Red Team labs at Pentester Academy. There's also eLearn Security has PTX, which is like purely focused on PowerShell and like red teaming, where you're querying Active Directory as opposed to running scans. So your intention is being more quiet. I don't know if HackTheBox does anything at DEF CON. I've only been to DEF CON once. I didn't see them there. Doesn't mean that they weren't there. It's really busy. They're also newer, like on the newer side, maybe 2 years old. So they're kind of just getting like running in full stride, if that makes sense. I remember when they didn't have a lot of people actually on their site, and I feel like it's way more popular than it used to be. Almost there. I went to last year's DEF CON. I called it Line Con because all it was standing in line. I felt like It's fun. Like you get to hang out and party and, meet other people. It's all about like networking and connections. Some of the villages, like the social engineering village, was too hard to get into. Like I didn't want to wait in like an hour plus long line. Same thing with some of the other villages, but they had cool ones like car hacking villages and just other things. Some of the talks were really long lines too. So I really hope they get like a better venue. I think they are moving to a bigger venue for next year. It's just hard to know the demand and keep up with it. Is this like HackTheBox live hacking? Yeah, kind of. We know the answers already. So the script took 4 minutes earlier. 4. And we're taking, where are we at now? 11? I feel like we're doing this to ourselves. Did I use the public Wi-Fi in DEF CON? No, I brought a burner phone. I did not use any Wi-Fi. I brought a burner phone. I didn't turn my phone on at all. And then I just texted like the people that were important, but I even kept the burner phone off for the most part. So we just used it to like communicate between like friends that were there and like coworkers that were there. Like, just to make sure like, hey, where are you at? But other than that, we really didn't make a lot of phone calls or connect any networks. Okay, we are up. Fresh out of the army. Ask me that later when we do a Q&A. We can talk about it. And if you're not in VetSec, ask me about that later too. Okay, so let's make this bigger. So when we look at the scan here, we get a lot of indicators that this is running some sort of Active Directory, right? We've got DNS running, or we've got DNS, which is indicator of maybe a domain controller. Kerberos is indicator of a domain controller. We've got SMB, right, on 139, 140, or 445 here. 389 is running LDAP, Active Directory. Even gives us the domain here is active.htp. So we've actually know here that we are running on Active Directory. All the signs are kind of pointing that this is a domain controller. So there's a few paths that we can take here. We can try to do like LDAP searching and seeing if we can get in with like no credentials. Typically that's not common. Usually what we want to poke around at first is always SMB. Like if we're doing like a capture the flag or anything else, we're gonna poke around at SMB probably first. We're also going to see if we can authenticate to anything, what kind of version SMB is running on, because that's usually the most vulnerable, especially if it's like if we see something like we see 2008 R2, we might think to ourselves, okay, maybe this has Eternal Blue on it if it hasn't been patched. So things we need to think about. And then we can scroll down here and look at some of the script results. And you can see that it's running 2.02 on SMB and that signing is enabled. So when we talked earlier, actually I can bring this article back up about the top 5 ways. Well, way number 2 was relay attacks. And relay attacks actually use responder, right? So it's doing poisoning, this LLMNR poisoning. And if you don't have signing enabled, then it can't verify who you are. So what it's doing is it's taking these credentials and they're coming in a hash, either NTLM v1 or v2, and it can relay that hash with multi-relay or NTLM LM relay X is another tool. It can use those and relay them to a machine. And if that user has access to that machine, you can get a shell without ever having to know the password or anything. You can just use a hash, relay the hash, and get onto a machine. It's pretty cool. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be searching on this SMB first. So we know that 445 is open, right? And one of the things we can do is we can just look up what's there. We could say SMB Client. We could do a -L. And I usually type it out like this. People have different syntax. And then we hit enter. Okay, and we got anonymous login here. So if we're getting anonymous login, this would be a finding. Like if we were doing a penetration test, we should never have anonymous login to this share. Another thing is I'm assuming we're just going to assume that this is an internal penetration test. This machine likely you'd never see something like this on an external network. So when we come back up, let's say we know we have anonymous access, right? But we don't know what we have access to. So we can try to connect to some of these, like say admin, and just hit enter like this. And then hit enter again. And then we actually get access denied. So we don't have the rights to access that folder. So for saving time, we're just going to go ahead and cheat a little bit and say this replication folder is the folder that we're actually going to have access to. The rest of them we don't have access to. So we can just tab back up and we can just type in replication like this. Hit enter. Okay, so now we have access to this share. This would be the same thing as mounting a share like in a Windows drive. So we just have a terminal version as opposed to like a GUI version here. We could mount it in a GUI if we wanted to. So we could say help. And a lot of the commands are very similar in terms of like a terminal. Like we could say ls to see what we're working with. Okay, there's a folder here, active.htb. We can cd into active.htb like that if we wanted to. But there's a trick here that we can actually just download this whole folder. So we want recurse on, which means we're going to go through all of the directories. And we can turn verbose off here as well. And then once we do that, we actually just do prompt off, not verbose off. And then what we can do is we can just say mget, and we can do an asterisk. And it's going to download everything. So this is a quick way to see what we have access to without having to cd into these folders and just kind of migrate around, because they have different folders here. There's a couple different paths. There's this 3.1b, there's this 6ac, and if we look through it here, we see an INI, an INI, INF, but one that stands out right away is this groups.xml. So this is when we talk about GPP. This is what's interesting. So let's go take a look into this. If you just downloaded like I did, you should have it in the folder that you were in. So I have downloads here, active.htb, and then we got to find that file. So where did we say it was? Policies, and then it's under 3.1b, and it's under machine, preferences, groups. Okay, let's open this guy up. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a groups.xml. So when we talk about GPP, we're saying group policy preferences. This is something that was back in the day allowed domain administrators to like create domain policies, and it did it without having to use or did it using embedded credentials, right? Like you don't have to create a script or do something that had credentials sitting in the script. You could actually just use an account to do your policies, or if you wanted to like map drives to a computer, etc. What you did is you had an account, and if we look in here, the account will be in here, and we also have a password. So the username's right here. You see the active.htb, right? That's the domain, and then you have this svc TGS, and we'll talk about what TGS means in a little bit. But we also have this thing called the C password. Now, the C password is Microsoft's attempt at hashing a password. So we have this password for this account, right? And they're hashing it under C password, but it wasn't very strong. Their hashing technique was easily cracked. So there's actually a tool out there that we can take, enter this password in, and try to crack it, and then we can log in with this service account. We don't know what kind of credentials we have. This could be full-on domain administrator, or this could be like a lower level account. So we're going to take this first, and we're just going to copy it. And what we're going to do here is we can just say Control-C. So it's called GPP decrypt, like this. Just paste. And it says ciphers deprecated, but provides this password here, this super long password. If we were trying to run this through Hashcat, we actually may have issues with this because I don't know what this is, like maybe 20 characters. That's pretty decent in length. So what we're going to do is we're just going to save this here, and we'll also note that the account is svc_tgs, like that. Okay, so in a pen tester point of view, the next thing that we would do is see what kind of privileges we had. If I'm looking at this, there's a tool out there called psexec. I would try to use psexec almost instantly and see, okay, can I get on a machine? Basically what psexec is, if you have administrator access to a computer, administrative user, we can use these credentials and get a reverse shell pretty easily via SMB. But this user is actually not a administrator, right? So instead, what we would do is we would go into SMB, and we can enumerate SMB. We could say, okay, well, what do we have access to? If we went back with the credentials, we can look through here and see what kind of access we have. We could also try to log in with this credential somewhere. We can do something called, it's a tool called crack map exec. So you say crack map exec like that. It doesn't come by default, but you can install it with apt-get. And say you had 100 machines in your domain. Well, what you can do is you can push the credentials that you just found with the username and password and see where it logs in. So all you're trying to do is gain access to as many machines where you can, because there's always a lot of password reuse, or if you're on a domain, a lot of users can get into places like many machines or all the machines. So small chance maybe that this gets you on a domain controller with these credentials. You don't know. So because we're not in a real domain environment, just want to talk through those conceptually. What we're going to be looking at is the true method of what we're going to be doing, and that's called Kerberosing. And if we look at the scan from earlier, we saw that Kerberos was up. Right? So we have Kerberos on 88. And so Kerberos is just like it's a form of authentication. And we're going to talk about how that authenticates here. So let's go ahead and minimize everything. I just want a clear screen here. I'm going to bring up my fancy pen if I can find it. Okay, so let's talk about Kerberos. My pen doesn't want to work. That's a fail. Let me close it and reopen it. Do I have a mustache? Probably like a 5 o'clock shadow. I shaved not that long ago. Don't hate on my mustache. I grow what I can, okay? Okay, let's say we have here a server, and please ignore these drawings. If this was Pictionary, this would be terrible. And a curvy computer over here. So we'll call this a client. So when we're a client and we want to authenticate, we're going to authenticate with Kerberos using tickets. Right? So what we're going to do first is we're going to say, hey, server or KDC. It's called the Key Distribution Center. That is this is a D. And we're going to say, hey, we want a ticket. So it's authentication ticket. It's called the TGT. And the server is going to say, okay, let me check those credentials. And if those credentials are good, we're going to pass that back. And we're going to say, yeah, I'll give you a ticket. Here's your ticket. And while we're at it, I'm going to use this service. It's called TGS, Ticket Granting Service, to actually encrypt that ticket. So we're going to encrypt that ticket with a secret key. And we're going to store it here locally on this client. This client's going to have this ticket until that ticket expires. When that ticket expires, it'll repeat this process and grant another ticket. Now, say there's a service we want to connect to, right? So let's add this guy down in here. We'll write service. We're going to write this terribly. And the service can be whatever you want. It could be SQL. It could be like an antivirus. This is something that you want to connect to as a user for whatever reason. So a service typically has something called SPN, which is a service principal name. So if you wanted to connect to this as a client, you would take your already established TGT, your ticket, and you would take the service principal name, and you would say, hey, KDC, I want to connect to this service here. And the KDC is going to say, well, okay, you do have access to that, so I'm going to let you connect to that. I'm going to provide you back a session key, right? So it's going to come back with a key. And then the client's going to use that key to connect to this service, this SPN. So where does this become interesting? Well, when we talk about Kerberosing, we can, with any valid TGT, with any valid ticket, right, we can request for a TGS ticket here for this SPN. So we're going to look at a tool that does that for us and see how that can be dangerous. I wouldn't even call this MSPaint, man. I wouldn't even call this MSPaint. I've seen better doodles in Paint. So we're going to open this terminal again. And we're going to run a tool called Get User SPNs. So we can locate Get User SPNs. And I need to preface this. If you guys are following along and you're running on like an older version of Kali, that's fine. The newer version of Kali, I want to say like 2018.4, maybe even 0.3 and on, InPacket by default is broken for this tool. So my recommendation is, if you have the time and you're watching, is to do something like this: apt-get purge InPacket, and purge all of your InPacket. Just get rid of it. Then what you can do is you can go out to the interwebs and we can just say InPacket. First one that comes up, Secure Auth Corp. You can clone or download this guy right here, this link, copy, paste it. I like putting things in my opt folder, if you can see here. All you would do is say git clone and then paste that link, and then run the install instructions. The install instructions are pretty easy. I think it's a pip install period. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, pip install period. So fairly straightforward, easy way to fix your InPacket if your InPacket does not work when we run this. Okay, so we're going to be running this get user SPNs, right? So we're going to cd into opt InPacket examples. We're going to run python get users spns.py. Okay, and if we hit enter, it'll give us some of the information that we need. Here's what we're going to type in. We're going to type in active.htb/service TGS. Remember, ticket granting service, right? So we say DC IP, the domain controller IP, and then we say request. All we're doing is we're sending a request here, and we're seeing if this user has a valid ticket, then we're going to send this request in, and you don't know what we're going to get back. So let's go ahead and do that. We need the password for this user, which we have here. Hit paste, hit enter, and whoa, something just happened. Hey, thanks for the sub, Overtime Comics. I appreciate that, man. Okay, so look at what we just did. So we just used this, right, to get user SPNs, and we found this account running a service here. The account is actually administrator. So here's where things get dangerous when it comes to Kerberosing. We have this hash here, and this hash is definitely crackable. There is a Hashcat module for it. Now, it's recommended, several things are recommended here. One being using long passwords, right? Like 25 characters or more is ideal. Another being using least privilege, right? Like you don't want whatever this account is that's running a service, you don't want that as a domain administrator. You want that as just a basic service user, right? You don't want any more privilege than this person already has. So you might crack another hash, that's fine. You might get to more places, okay, but don't let this be a domain administrator. I know everything is moving now to something called group managed service accounts. Password vaulting, things like that is another way to mitigate this. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this hash and we're going to try to crack it. So you can follow along in Kali. If your Kali is a VM, you're going to add something called --force at the end. I'll show you on my Windows machine how we're going to do that. So all I'm doing here is I am going to be using this that I've already put out into a text document just to save time. I copy this information right here, And then I am using rocku.txt. We're not using anything too crazy, too advanced here. So let's go ahead and pull up my administrator tab. So this is on my machine here. And the reason I'm running it on my machine is because it's going to use my graphics card. So lately I've been having issues. You can use --force on your VM and it'll use your CPU. But when you do that, I have an i9 or a 9th edition. Sorry, I have an i7 9th edition, and it's not compatible right now for whatever reason. Hashcat on a VM does not work with that. So I've got my 1080 Ti. That's what I'm running right now. So the 1080 Ti will crack through this rocku.txt list pretty fast. So if you have a decent graphics card, back when I was using, like when I was in the OSCP doing that, you could take a basic list and it would take like 4 hours to run through Rocku or something crazy. But if you would offload it onto, I had a 970 when I was going through PWK, and it was like that, like so fast, right? So you're going to see it's pretty quick here. So what we're going to do is we are going to, we're just going to say Hashcat 64.exe. This is a little different because I'm running on a Windows, but you could just type in Hashcat on a VM. And I'm just going to hit --help so we can see what I'm doing. So we need a module, right? And if we search through here, you see on the side over here, it's kind of organized by different things. We're looking for a network protocol. And if you remember looking at our hash, let's go back. You see it says KRB5 TGS. So it's Kerberos 5. So if we go into this administrator panel here, you see Kerberos 5 right here. So the module or type we're looking for is this 13100. That way it knows what it's cracking against. So I'm going to scroll down, and we're just going to run against that. So it's going to be something like Hashcat 64.exe. We're going to say module 13100. You can add an A0 for doing a dictionary attack if you want. And then we're going to say, I think I called it Kerberos.txt. And then we'll also need our password, which I believe is Rocku. Now, if you're running on a VM, you just want to add in --force at the end. That should force you to use your CPU instead of the non-existent GPU that you would have in a VM. Love to use git push. Hey, Isle of Dong, how's it going, man? And I have never used HackTheBox. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. I've ran this before, so the hashes are already in the pot file. Let me see if I could delete that pot file real quick, and we'll run this again, just so you guys can have a real life example. Clear all of these out. Save it. Okay. You could have a GPU on a VM. I haven't figured it out. I'm not very smart though, so it's possible. Okay, so we cracked it in seconds, 2 seconds. So that's the power of the GPU. And we got through 76% of that list in 2 seconds. So we see now that the password is Ticketmaster 1968. And let's go play with that. Let's see what we can do with that. So we'll notate this here. The video in chat covering some of the screen. I'm sorry. Here. I got you guys. I don't want you looking at me anyway. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say MSF console like this. We're going to be running Metasploit. Remember when I talked earlier about PS exec? I believe Impact has a PS exec that you can run. I don't ever run it. I like running Metasploit because Metasploit's so flexible. So all we're going to do is we can search for psexec. It should be exploit Windows SMB. Yeah, it's this guy right here. So we're just going to say use exploit Windows SMB psexec. I'll make this full screen. And then we say options. We got to see what it wants. So it wants a remote host. And so we're going to say set our host to the address of that machine, which is .100. And now it needs to know a few things. We need to know the domain, the pass, and the user. So remember that we set SMB domain was active.htb. The SMB user was just administrator. And then the SMB pass was Ticketmaster 1968. And then we could try running this. It doesn't always work on the automatic, but we can definitely try it. I'm actually not sure if it's going to work on the automatic. We got a shell. Let's see. Okay, so we got an 86. We got a 32-bit shell on a 64 architecture. But we can shell into here and just say, who am I? We're system. Great. So we can go find the flag if we're hunting a flag, right? What becomes important here, say this is real world pen test. And what we're doing is, let's go ahead and just Control C out of this. I want to take you guys a little deeper. So if I'm in a real world pen test here and this is a sensitive machine, then sure, we're going to scrape this machine. We're going to try to find information as long as that's in scope. I've never had that not in scope, but what you're trying to do is find whatever you can, right? Well, there's some modules that I like to load up. One of them being incognito. And we can run incognito. So with incognito, we could say list tokens -u for users. You would be surprised how many times that you come in here and you see like a domain admin account or an account that you can elevate your privileges in on a domain. So all you would have to do here is say like impersonate token, and then you set the user. Like if there was a HTB or active.htb / domain admin, just for an example, we could delegate ourselves as that user and then do actions as that user. So that's one thing. I also like to load Keely. We're going to have issues with Keely right now because we're running on a 86 on a 64. But if we migrate over to a 64, we could say creds all and try to dump creds. It's not going to work on this architecture. So we'd have to migrate over. Another thing, always hash dump. Again, not going to work on this architecture. But these are things. And if we wanted to migrate, it's always risky to migrate. Let's see. PS. So we could look for a PID that we can migrate into and find. Right now we're running on x86 and this is us. We came in through PowerShell here. And if we wanted to migrate to 64, we'd pick one of these and pray. So it just depends. But you would want something running as authority system if you can. And pray it works. A lot of times it breaks it, so I'm not going to show it to you. But ideally we could do that. We can dump hashes. If we're looking here, we can get into a shell. Some things you like to look at, like IP config, always important to look at. Like you should know what your IP is, and maybe you have a second IP address that you didn't know about. Like your machine is dual home. Or you can run Netstat -ANO. And holy shit, that's a lot of stuff. You can see what ports are open on the computer and see if it's talking out to any other machines over some port. If there's some connection, you're just looking for connections. What is this machine doing? What's its purpose? Who's it talking to? What is its importance, right? We know we're on a domain controller, so we've got the computer at this point that we want. But there's a ton of information that you can find here. Like a thing that we like to do on domain controllers is we like to dump the hashes. We dump the hashes and pretty much you usually get all the users. So then we just sit there and we crack as many users as we can. And that's a good story to write back, right? Like you say, okay, you've got 1,000 users and we just cracked 400 passwords. That means we got 40% of your passwords. Something's wrong with your password policy. We shouldn't be cracking this many, right? So like you want a story to tell when you do a pen test report and when you present to somebody. Password policy is always a good story to tell. So it's not always about domain admin. You got to think about how you got to domain admin. So what policies in place were the issue? If you're doing like that LLMNR poisoning that we showed earlier, the number one thing on that list, if you're cracking those passwords, that's because the password policy is typically not strong enough. So unfortunately, I've seen domain admins use their first name with a 1 after it. Like, you can't predict an environment and how good they're going to be. I've seen password policies that were a minimum of 4 characters. Again, like you can emphasize as much as you want, but like you have to have documented proof and a story to bring back to say this is why it's bad. So on top of Netstat, you can always look at the routing table, do a route print. If there was a second gateway here or something going on, that would be interesting to think about. You can look at ARP as well, ARP-A. Come in here and see again, like, oh, what are we talking to? So on most HackTheBox machines, you're never going to see something else. If you do a more advanced lab environment, you may see some dual home computers where you have to pivot, things like that. So you should always just kind of look through this and see where you can navigate around to. Okay, so with that being said, we've got 4 minutes to stay on schedule. I'm going to go ahead and start prepping to move over. That's pretty much it for this box. I just kind of want to give you guys an idea of what GPP is, an idea of what Kerberosing is and Kerberos itself is, and just some of the things we might look for on the tail end once we do get access to a machine. So let's go ahead and just start migrating over for our stuff on dank walkthrough. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thought you said drink water for a second. It really gave me some army flashbacks, which I have a drink in here and I am thirsty. What's a good password policy? They're saying like 20 to 25 now, like in terms of length. They just built I know they built a super machine that cracked 15 or 16 characters in like seconds now. Hydrate or die. Yeah, I need to hydrate. This isn't really hydrating though. Oh, you can't even see me. I'm drinking Diet Mountain Dew. The high quality H2O. Water boy. All right. I'm going to kill you guys with some PowerPoint here for a minute. Like 5 minutes. Don't murder me. I'm not afraid to end this stream. All right. So we're going to be talking about buffer overflows. We're going to be talking about just basics. 32-bit Windows buffer overflows. Should be a pretty simple follow along. I do want to preface this with sometimes you're going to run into issues. I'm going to show you the setup that I'm running and how to do it. If you run into issues, we won't have time to troubleshoot if we want to stay on schedule. It's a pretty set on like a 45-minute-ish ordeal. So what we're going to do is we'll cover through it. If you got questions at the end, we can kind of talk about it. But if you run into like a tool issue or something like that, then what we're going to do is I just ask that you watch it back later and try to figure it out. Or I've got a course on this as well, and I can link that if you're interested. So it's pretty much the same walkthrough, just broken down in like short little videos. So let's go ahead and just talk about what we're going to cover. So we're going to quickly go over the stack and what the stack looks like, why buffer overflows happen. We're going to talk about the buffer overflow steps at a very high level. I don't expect you to understand anything I'm talking about, but by the end of it, you'll say, hey, I actually know what he's saying, hopefully. And then we're going to talk about what tools we're using. Yeah, the stack. There's no other stack. So let's talk about the anatomy of the stack. This is all you need to know. There's more registers. There's plenty more information, but when we're talking at like a base level, you need to know this. You need to know that there's the ESP, that's the top of your stack, and you've got the EBP, which is your base, right, or your bottom of your stack. And in the middle there, you got this stuff called buffer space, which buffer space grows downward. Now, in a perfect world, when we talk about buffer overflows, you want to send characters to this buffer space, right? So imagine we're sending bytes, and the bytes are just a bunch of A's like this. Now we're sending these bytes, and they're coming through, and the buffer space is growing downwards. Everything's happening fine, and we are sanitizing everything correctly. This is what it should look like in theory, like a very high level. If we have something called a buffer overflow, then what happens is, oh shit, you roll over to the bottom, right? Like you can overflow into this thing called the EIP here. And this EIP is your instruction pointer. Basically what it allows you to do is point to a set of instructions. So at a very, very high level, what we're trying to do is we're trying to overflow a buffer space, get to an EIP, control that EIP, and point to something malicious. That's all a buffer overflow is. There are complex buffer overflows, but today, hopefully, it should be pretty straightforward. So let's talk about the steps really quick on what this looks like. So the first thing we're going to do is called spiking. Spiking is basically just sending a bunch of bytes at a command, and we're going to try to see if we can break a program by sending a bunch of bytes. Similarly, there's something called fuzzing. Once we find out what the command is that we're breaking, we're going to do something called fuzzing where we try to send bytes in increments. And those increments, we're going to try to like really narrow down where we're breaking the program. Like how many bytes does it really take to break this program? And when we figure that out, we're going to do something called finding the offset. And all finding the offset means is we're trying to find that point where we break the program and we land on the EIP. Because remember, the instruction pointer is where we want to control. So if we can control the instruction pointer, we are golden. Then we're going to overwrite the EIP. We're going to find some bad characters, and we'll talk about what that means. We're going to do finding the right module. We'll also talk about what that means. We're going to generate shellcode and gain root. So there's a couple of like house cleanup issues that we got to do here. Finding bad characters, we need that for generating our shellcode. And we need to find a module that's going to be protection free when it comes to memory protections, and that has the right set of instructions for our pointer. So let's go ahead and just take a look at what spiking is. So let's go into Keely. And also, actually, I have tools to be used, don't I? Let's talk about the tools real quick. Sorry. Okay, so I'm running on a victim machine, Windows 10. It is best that you turn off your firewall. You don't have to turn it off until we get to the exploit stage if you want to be cautious and paranoid like a good security person should be. We're going to be using Vulnserver software. If you do not already have this installed, it's probably too late to follow along, but you can still watch. But the links are down below in the description. We're also using Kali Linux. Somebody here prefers Parrot. That's on you. You can follow along in Parrot as well. You can pretty much follow along on any machine given that you have a shellcode generator. And we're going to be using a tool called Immunity Debugger. So now let's hop in. I'm not dissing on Parrot, man. I'm sure it is dank. Okay, so I've got a folder set up already. So we're going to cd to that folder. I've just called it buffer overflow. And let me make this bigger for you guys. Take away my face. And now we're going to load up Immunity as well. So let me get that loaded. Now, when you run Immunity Debugger, make sure that you run it as an administrator. No problem, son. No problem. Hey, Ben, how's it going? Okay, so we're running this as administrator. We're going to attach Vulnserver.exe here. And it's paused down on the bottom. We just need to make sure that it's running. Might have to hit play twice. So it should look something like this where you've got it running. And we can test this connection. So there's a couple things you need to know. You need to know the IP address of your Windows machine. So I believe mine is sitting at 192.168.1.114. And we know that this connects on port 9999. So what we can do is connect to that and make sure that it's working. And we can kind of explore the program as well. So we can do that with Netcat. We can just type Netcat. We can type in an IP address that we want to connect to. I believe it's 114. We'll see. Okay, and it says welcome to vulnerable server. This is what we want. If we go back and look at our vuln server, you can see that I've got the connection for me on this port 7225. Okay, so it says type help for help. So help. Now we're in here and we've got a bunch of commands that we can run, right? We've got the stats, rtime, ltime, srun, trun, etc. What we're going to do here is we're going to do something called spiking. So we're going to spike these commands and we're going to say, okay, what command breaks, right? If we spike a command with a bunch of bytes, can we break it? So we're going to try first on stats. We're going to see that stats does not break. And then we're going to try on this trun and we're going to see it break. So I'm going to give you an example of both. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control-C on this and disconnect. Now to spike, there's a built-in tool to Keely. It's called generic send TCP. The syntax is pretty straightforward. You're going to run your generic send TCP, the IP address and the port, which we know already, and then you got a spike script. And then typically it's 00 here on the skip var and skip string. So let's take a look at my stats spike script. Very, very, very basic. All we're doing is reading a line and we're reading the string, which is stats. Very straightforward. And then we've got this string variable for 0. That's pretty much it. So all we're going to do is it's going to be random, right? What we're going to do is it's going to send maybe like 100 bytes, then it's going to send 5,000 bytes, then 25 bytes. Like spiking is like literally what it sounds like. It's just spiking it with a bunch of bytes. And we'll know if it breaks because immunity will pause on the program. So hopefully you've had time to get this copied down. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this now. And we're going to use what we just saw here. So you saw generic send TCP 192.168.1.114. All nines like that. We have a stats.spike script. And then 0 and 0. Again, make sure your immunity is running down on the bottom. And we'll send this guy over and over. And if we look at our vuln server, you'll see that the connections are being made. And it's sending all kinds of sized variables here. So knowing what we know, this is not vulnerable, not this command. So let's take a look at what a vulnerable command will do. So all I've done is edited that same script, but instead of stats, I just put the trun in here, this trun, right? Trun space, save that, same thing. And all I'm going to do is just change this into trun. Again, make sure that your immunity is still running. It hasn't broken, so it should be. And then we're going to hit enter. And then I'm going to hit Control-C. Your immunity debugger should light up like pretty fast. Like it paused for me. It starts blinking on my taskbar. And then we can see something in here. Like we see the EAX register, right? And we see this trun command. And we can notate that it says trun. It's got this / period, colon, and then another / and then a bunch of A's come through. So all it's doing is sending a bunch of A's in various bytes. Now, if we look, we see some familiar registers that we talk about. We see the EBP, which is the base, right? The base is a bunch of 4 ones. Now, 4 ones, all that is just 4 A's here, right? So A's are 41 in hex. We look at the EIP, our malicious pointer, and that's 41, right? Not malicious, but it's going to be malicious. 41's here across the board. And then we look at the top of the stack. It actually flows from the EIP into this top of the stack here, the ESP, and you see a bunch of A's come through. So this indicates to me that we've gone too far with whatever this is, but it also indicates that we're found something vulnerable here, right? We paused the program, we broke it, doesn't work anymore, and we've completely overwritten this EIP, which is ideally our goal. We want to get to this malicious pointer. So we're going to take a look at another step now where we can kind of start narrowing this information down. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something called fuzzing. So let's go ahead and close out completely of immunity. This is The process I like to do, sometimes you can just detach and reattach an immunity. I found that gives issues sometimes, so I always like to just close it out, rerun it as administrator. Let me drag this back over for you guys. Reattach Vulnserver. Play twice. You should see it running down here. Okay, and now what we're going to do. Let's fuzz this guy. So I've written these scripts ahead of time. I'm going to talk slow, so if you're following along, you can kind of type these out. So let's go into the first script. This is step 1. So this is 1.py. So if we look at the script, we're going to read it down. I'm just calling out that we're running Python here. I'm importing sys and socket. That way we can declare a port and IP address later. And then I'm importing sleep from time. That way we can sleep the program. So let's talk about what this program does. So the first thing we do is we declare a variable called buffer. And we're setting buffer equal to 100 A's. And then we're going to do a while loop. So we're just going to say while true, I want you to try something. So what we're going to say is we want to connect. And we say this socket.af inet. That's all that is IPv4. And the sock stream is your port that you're connecting to. So we're going to say, okay, I want to connect to that port on this IP address and port. And then I want to send a message. And we're sending this trun message. Remember the /::/. We saw that before, right? So we actually have to include that in our message. We didn't know that existed until we broke the program, but now we do. So when we send that information over, we're also going to send over our A's, 100 A's, right? We're going to close the program. We're going to sleep it. And then we're going to build the buffer variable up by 100 again. So what this means is, as long as this is true meaning that I can connect to this program, then I'm going to keep sending an increasing of 100 every time. So it's going to go 100, 200, 300, 400, etc., all the way up. Eventually, the program's going to break. It's not going to talk anymore. And then it's going to throw an exception. And it's going to say, hey, fuzzing crashed at X amount of bytes, right? We're going to figure out where the bytes crashed at. And then we're going to exit. So let's go ahead and save this. We're going to close out. And all we're going to do is just run this 1.py. Now, another thing I should note too is you should change the mode to executable if you haven't already. Mine are already there, except apparently this 4.py is not. So we'll do that. But make sure that you're lighting up green. That way you can execute these. So we'll run python 1.py. And it's going to start sending information. And you can see actually that it's sending through here, right? It keeps iterating through more and more. And the script isn't perfect. You've got to wait for Vulnserver, or actually for immunity to light up. When immunity lights up, that's when you want to kill it. Okay, immunity just lit up now. You see it's paused. I'm going to come into here and actually just Control-C, kill that script. Okay, it says we crashed somewhere around 2,500 bytes. I may have been a little slow. It may have been like 23, 2,400. The exit's not working as planned, but that's okay. So what we're doing now is we're going to say, okay, we've crashed the program somewhere at 2,500 bytes, right? And if we weren't running it in immunity, if we were just running it on its own, this would crash and report back where it crashed at appropriately. So now what we need to do is we need to say, okay, well, I know somewhere around 2,500 bytes I crashed it, but I'm not sure where. And we can look at immunity, and you see the trun message came through, but wherever it crashed, it didn't really overwrite the EIP like we were used to seeing. So we kind of don't know exactly where we're at. So what we can do is we can do something called finding the offset. So when we talk about finding the offset, all we're saying is we want to find where that EIP is. And there's a tool built in already for that. So what that tool is called pattern create and pattern offset. So if you're running on new Keely, they have actually recently changed it. So let's look for pattern create. They put this user bin MSF pattern create here. There is a Ruby shell as well, or Ruby script you can run as well if you're more comfortable with that. If I can copy this. So we're going to paste that, and then we're going to set a length, a -L. And all I want to do is I want to declare how many bytes I want to generate. So we know it crashed around 2500, and we could set it at 2500. But I like to make it a little bigger just to kind of see how much room I have. So I'm going to set this at 3000. And this is just going to create a cyclical value here. If we look at it, all it is, capital A, lowercase a, 0. Capital A, lowercase a, 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this information, right? And we're going to modify our script a little bit. So let's take a look at 2.py that I've got. Okay, so the top is the same. I've gotten rid of the variable that we had before, and I've just named this offset. And then I added in this cyclical value here, right? All it is a string. So, and then instead of having a wall connection, all we got to do is try to connect. We don't need to loop anymore because we know we're kind of somewhere in the ballpark, right, of 2500 to 3000. So we're just going to connect. And we're going to send this whole offset value. And then we're going to close. And if for some reason we don't connect, we're going to say, hey, we had an error connecting to the server. So we're just going to put an exception in here. We don't need the sleep value anymore. We can do away with that. And we also don't need that the buffer variable that we had before that was incrementing. So it actually gets a little slimmer on the code. So once we have this code like this, we can save it. And we can go back into Immunity. Now this immunity is already broken and paused, so I'm going to close out of it. I'm going to reopen immunity, and we're going to launch Vulnserver again. And we're going to see what happens when we throw this value in. Let's bring this over. Let's attach. Play. Okay, so we come into here, and we're going to say Python 2.py. You should see your immunity light up immediately because now we're breaking it on command. You see we pause down here again. You come into here, you see this trun message or the T run. You see AA0, AA1. Okay, so we saw it come through. We actually even see the ESP get overwritten. And remember, the ESP is after the EIP for us. So the EIP comes down and then it writes over the top here. So we're actually really curious about this 386 F as in Foxtrot 4337. So knowing this information, we can actually put this back into the program and see what happens. So we've generated the offset. Now there's another tool called pattern offset here, right? We did the creation. Now we say pattern offset. I'm taking a wild guess here that it's the same area. And you can do a queue for what we found, right? And it was 386 F4337, I believe. I could be wrong. 386 F4337. So all this is going to do is it's going to look for this value in this cyclical generation that it did, right? And it's going to say, hey, do I see it? If I see it, I'll tell you where I see it. So let's hit enter. Okay, so it found now an exact match at offset of 2003. That means byte number 2004 is where our EIP should start. And we can figure out if that's actually true. So let's take a look at my 3.py script. Again, this has changed ever so slightly. I got rid of the offset variable, and now I've created a variable in here called shellcode. The rest really holds true, minus replacing offset with shellcode down here. So we said that A should be equal to 2003, and then our EIP should start at the 2004th byte. Well, how do we know, how can we differentiate A, B, right? Like, we know we're getting a bunch of 41s when we overwrite, so why don't we just change it to a B and see if we get a bunch of 42s? So if we send 4 42s, we should see that light up on the EIP. So if for some reason the EIP is 41, 41, 42, 42, we know we're slightly off. We can play around with it. In theory, when we send this, the EIP should be all 42s across the board. So let's go ahead and save that. And again, we need to close immunity and reopen it. Attach, play. Okay, now let's say python 3.py. Your immunity should light up again. Okay, the trun came through, a bunch of A's, EBP 401, 401, 401, and would you look at the EIP, it's a bunch of 42s. So this means that we are now in full control of the EIP. So now all we got to do is a little bit of cleanup. We got the finding the bad characters that we have to look for, and we've got to find a good module that's memory free, memory protection free, and then we're in the home stretch. We generate our shellcode and we try to gain root here. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and close out. So the next thing we're going to do, let's take a look at script number 4. Okay, so we're looking for a bad character. And if you want to grab this list, Georgia Weidman has a list out there. Do I have it? So all you got to do is say bad chars. If you Google bad chars list, something like this, the first one that comes up is bulb security. If you forward back in, all I did was literally copy this, and I took out the X00. So let's talk about what this does. Okay, so when we say we want to find bad characters, sometimes there are characters in shellcode that can actually break the program, right? Like there's something in there that it may interact specifically with that program that causes it to do something. It may cause it like a request or do something in general. Like we just don't know what's going on in the underworking of the program. By default, 00, I believe, is a truncate. So that just means it cuts off, right? So we don't even want that in there. We just know it's bad by default. But I always start with 01, and I run it all the way through FF. And we're going to send this through, and we're going to read it and see if we can figure out if there's anything bad. And we'll look to see, like, identify what a bad character looks like. So all I've done is add this in after the EIP here. And we're going to save that. Close it, open up immunity again, and let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, lit up. Okay, so we come over here to the ESP, and we're going to say, right-click it and say follow and dump. Here's our hex dump here. Okay, now remember, we sent 01, right, X01 down to XFF down here. Now this is tedious. This sucks. It's really easy to miss a bad character. But the task at hand to do is to come through here and say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we know it goes 0A, 0B, 0C, right? We know the increments. We know what should be there. If something was out of place, then we know we have a bad character. Meaning, if I counted 1, 2, 3, and then this was like a weird character, like say like this little thing down here, or this like said 14 instead of 4, okay, then we know something's up, right? We know something's wrong with the 4. We're going to take the 4 out and try again. Vulnserver is so nice to us. They have no bad characters. So I wanted to go ahead and demonstrate for you what a program with a bad character would look like. So we're going to go back to our friendly PowerPoint. And let's look at this again. So in here, we actually have some bad characters. So if we come through and we look at this list, okay, it's kind of hard to identify. Let's click on this here. Sorry, I had the wrong one up. So if we look at the finding bad characters now, 1, 2, 3, B0, B0. Okay, that should definitely be 4 and 5, right? So that's missing. 6, 7, 8, 9, 0A, 0B, 0C, 0D, 0E, 0F, 10, 11, 12. Okay. So we're kind of just looking around, it looks like, for these B0s. They show up weird, right? Looks like there's one here at 28 and then 29. And I won't force you guys to sit through all this because it's not as relevant for Vulnserver. But there's 2 of them, and there's the rest of them. So if we were doing bad characters, we would have to notate all the bad characters that exist in here. So we would write X04, X05, X28, X29, etc. Go through this whole list and notate these all down. And then we would use that when we generate our shellcode. So that'll come back into play here in a couple steps. You'll see how this all falls into place. So that is it for that. Now we need to do something that's called finding the right module. So that's all about memory protections and getting to that point. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm going to close out of Immunity again and reopen it one more time. Let's attach Vulnserver. Run it. Now there is something that I should note here. So we're using something called Mona, and Mona by default does not come with Immunity Debugger. Let me actually show you what you should be looking for, because if you're following along, you might need mona.py. So there's two things we need to do here. I'm going to paste this in the chat, but I'll also show you. If I can drag this over. It's really hard to drag on my screen here. Let me see. Aha. Okay, so you've got this C program files x86, immunity debugger, py commands. And in here, I have put Mona. So you want Mona to be in here. You can find Mona by just going out and Googling it, as with anything pretty much. You can say Mona Py, and it's right here. All you got to do is download this and put the mona.py into that folder. Let me paste that folder into chat. That didn't work. I'm terrible. So let me see. I actually closed out. So it's C, program files, x86, immunity inc, and then I believe it's py commands. Pretty straightforward, though. It should actually tell you where to install it right here. So let's go ahead now and run Mona and see what we can do with it. So down here at this bottom little bar, we can actually type in !Mona and say modules, like this. Okay, so what this does for us, this lists the modules that are running, right? And it says, okay, here are the modules, and here are some of the memory protections, right? We've got ASLR, safe SEH. We'd also be looking like at dep, etc. You want across the board to be false here. So if it says true, it's got some sort of memory protection, and it makes it that much harder to actually achieve an overflow on the program. So again, Vulnserver is very nice to us. And we've got the exe here, but if you look right here on top, we've also got this essfunc.dll. So we want this guy right here. This looks like the right module for us. Now we got to do a couple things before we can get there. The first thing we got to do is we're going to use a tool called NASM shell. And all that's going to do is help us find an opcode equivalent of assembly language here. So we're going to be converting assembly language into hex code. So let's take a look at how we would actually do that. So if we go back, and let me just open up a new tab. This will actually make it easier for us. And we say locate NASM shell. We'll use this again here. And we don't have to run this with any commands. We actually just paste it. It takes a second to load up. Okay, so what we're looking for is we're just looking for the hex code of this assembly language here. We're going to run a jump command. All this means is we're going to, when we hit our instruction pointer, we're going to make sure that our instruction pointer is going to be a jump. That jump is going to jump then into our malicious shellcode. And when we bring this back, we see the hex code for JMP ESP is FFE4. Okay, so we can use this information combined with the module that we just found to find something else. Let's take a look. So we can come back into here and we can say we've got Mona, and we say Mona find, -s, and we know that we have xff/xe4 for the JMP ESP, and we have the module that we want, essfunc.dll. Okay, so now what has this done? So this has brought back some return addresses. And right here, this 625011AF, that's a return address. In theory, this return address should say, okay, well, this is going to be a JMP ESP for this module here, which has no memory protections. So if you point to me, I'm going to jump to something. So we're going to make this return address our EIP. We can actually test this first before we do anything. So we can come back into here, and we can come in and we can say, let's make that full size. We can click on this little guy here, this last arrow. We could type this address in, the 625011AF, and hit OK. And you can see here it says FFE4. It is a JMP ESP. That's correct. I'm actually going to go ahead and hit F2 on this. We're going to set what's called a breakpoint. So what we're about to do now is we're about to test this. We're going to say, okay, I want to test and see if I can hit this breakpoint. So if I hit this breakpoint, I know that we've hit the jump code. The jump code is going to point to whatever I tell it to go to next. We can clarify later on the bad characters. But we're going to talk about it. I'll cover on the bad characters when we get back into generating the shellcode. I'll emphasize again. Okay, so we've got this breakpoint set, right? And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into our code. So we're going to go back into Keely. Going to exit out of this. And now I'm going to close here. We're just going to run, or we're going to edit 5.py. I want you guys to take a look at 5.py. Okay, so where our EIP used to be, the 4 Bs, we've got AF115062. If we look at this, this is that same address, that return address, but it's backwards, right? We've got 625011AF. That should sound more familiar. Okay, well, we're going to put this backwards in this architecture. Since we're running x86, what we're doing here is we're actually doing something called little endian, this little endian format. And all that means is the low order byte is stored in memory at the lowest address, and the high order byte is stored in memory at the highest address. So we actually have to write it backwards like this. So with this done like this, what we can do is we can save. And we can run Python 5.py with our breakpoint set. It should light up again. It should pause. And if we look down here, it says breakpoint at ESSfunc 625011AF. That means we hit our breakpoint successfully. This code is ready to jump to whatever we tell it. So now all we got to do is get malicious and write some shellcode, generate some shellcode real quick. Very, very simple. And we are in the home stretch. So I'm going to close immunity. We're actually done with immunity. And a couple things we're going to do. We're going to need to turn off Windows Firewall at this point. We can wait until we generate the shellcode, and then we're going to turn it off, and then we're going to load up Vulnserver and try to connect. Okay, so last thing we're going to do. We're going to use a tool called MSF Venom. So MSF Venom is a shellcode generator. So we say MSF Venom. I'm going to type this out, and then I'm going to explain to you guys exactly what everything means, and we'll touch again on the bad characters and why they're important. Okay, so let's talk about this. So we are running MSF Venom, which is a shellcode generator. The first switch here is a switch of P. Now P stands for payload. What we're running here is a Windows payload because we know we're on a Windows architecture, right, or Windows operating system. We are running what's called a reverse shell over TCP. So this is saying, okay, a reverse shell means that a victim is going to connect back to the attacker. So because the victim is connecting back to us, we have to write in our L host here, our listening host. This is our IP address that we're going to be listening on, and this is the port we're going to be listening on. Meaning we're going to have a Netcat listener up, and in this shellcode it says, hey, I want you to go ahead and connect to this person on this port. This exit func equals thread. All this does is add stability. This file type of C here, it's just our file type. The -A is for architecture. We know we're running on 32-bit architecture or x86. And then this -B is for bad characters. So again, let's talk about bad characters. So we have x00. We talked about that being like the default bad guy, right? 00 a lot of times, or all the time, I'm not really sure, can truncate, right? So meaning that it can cut off the code. So if 00 was in the shellcode when we generate this, you're going to see what the shellcode looks like. It's going to be a bunch of hex. If 00 was in there and we send it to the program and the 00 instruction is to truncate, then that ruins the whole shellcode that we're sending over because it gets cut up, and we can't go any further, right? So it won't execute correctly. The same thing would happen if there were other bad characters. So we found no bad characters. But remember when we looked at that the other bad characters list, and we had 9 in there, for example. Okay, so we could say X09 would be another bad character. Or if 10 was a bad character, we put X10, right? So you would add to your list all the bad characters. And all this means is these aren't going to show up in our shellcode when we generate it. So we would just try to remove them. There's a small chance they wouldn't show up in your shellcode anyway, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And then all we got to do is hit enter here, let this generate. And here's what the shellcode looks like. So see, it looks very similar to that, what we were just doing. And we've got a payload size of 351 bytes. Payload size becomes important when we get into spacing. I will talk to you about spacing here in a second. Let's just go ahead and copy this guy. You don't need the semicolon. And we say gedit. I'm going to gedit my 6.py. And you can see I already got in here. It does change occasionally. Like you can see XB0, this time X27. So it changes a little bit. I'm actually just going to copy and paste it, even though it should, in theory, work. And I've titled this variable exploit. So we paste this into here, and then I add it into our shellcode down here. Now, we've got the A equals 2003 bytes, right? Then we get to the pointer. This pointer is our jump code. This jump code is going to jump to this exploit. All I've done here, you see this is interesting. You don't know what this is yet. This X90 is called a NOP, or it stands for no operation. Sometimes, usually it's good practice, is to add padding in between the exploit shellcode you're sending and the return address. Sometimes these two butt heads. They interfere with each other, or it doesn't operate correctly. There's a chance if we took this NOPS out here that this code would not execute the way we want it to. So these no operations, all they are is padding. They literally do nothing else but pad. So when we talked about it earlier, I said that spacing could become an issue. So when we talk about spacing, we already got 2003 bytes, 2007 bytes, another 32 bytes, and then 351 bytes here. So what is that? Somewhere around 2400. Say that this program only went up to 2350. Okay, well then this shellcode generation is not going to work, or we're going to have to take some NOPs out, right? Like you get some situations where it gets really tight, and the payload that you generate may matter. You may not be able to run this Windows reverse TCP that we did. We may have to pick a different payload to get something smaller down in size. There may have to be different encoding, etc. For this, it's such a nice program. It's really laid out well for beginners. There's not much we have to worry about, but it's always important to think about size and to have that in the back of your mind as you get further into exploit development. So we are going to save this. Vera is ready to fire. I am almost ready to fire. Okay, I need to do a couple things. We're going to clear this. I'm just going to run netcat listener. Just like that. We're going to listen on port 4444. Apparently I have a connection. We are doing something somewhere. That may be me from before. Let's see. Oh, 10.100. Ha, it's connecting to us. Let's go ahead and let me just kill this network. If you have the same thing, let's see if this connects. Okay, now we're listening. Okay, we've got that listening. And then what we're also going to do is I'm going to go into Windows Firewall. I'll bring this over so you guys can see it. I'm going to say turn off Windows Firewall. They've gotten better at blocking this stuff. They used to not. They actually, I came back to the computer earlier after running through it, and they deleted Vulnserver on me. So they detected there was malware running with the program and ended up deleting it. Defender did. So hats off, I guess. Let's see. So we've got this. We are ready to fire. So I told you you don't need immunity. All you got to do is run up Vulnserver. So let me get that up and running. I don't have that. Give me 1 second. So desktop, Vulnserver. Run Vulnserver as administrator if you can. Okay, we've got it up and running. Say Python 6.py. And did we connect? We got a connection. We may be getting blocked somewhere else too. Let's try again. Let's run it one more time. We may have to turn off Windows Defender as well. Let's see. Okay, let me see if Defender's blocking this. Okay, so I've turned off real-time protection. Let's see if that doesn't do the trick. And we may have to fire up Vulnserver one more time. There we go. Windows Defender, man. Look at it coming in the clutch. Okay. So a couple things about this. We're using very, very generic malware. We're generating like a very basic payload. It's not like obfuscated at all. We're running on port 4444, which is like a default Metasploit port. So these are really basic things that Windows Defender is going to pick up on. So if you're having issues, that very, very well could be it. And now we are in here. Who am I? Heath, I'm an administrator. So that is it. We have successfully overflowed our buffer, and we've got 1 minute left on the clock. In the clutch, guys. So I'm going to take a drink really quick, and then we're going to do Q&A. So you can ask me whatever you guys want. Let's turn this stuff back on while we're at it. Be good security people. Hey, thanks Spicy Bacon and thanks Solo Dead. I appreciate the subs, man. It's awesome. Okay. Should be good. All right. Questions. Is it possible to overflow past the EIP? Yeah, if you recall, we were overriding the ESP at one point. Like when we, in the first beginning stages before we actually had the EIP controlled, we were sending more bytes than we needed to. So it is possible to go past the EIP into the ESP. Even though the ESP is the top of the stack, the next step after the EIP becomes the ESP. It's kind of confusing, but it is possible to go past the EIP. I'm a Debian guy all the way. I'm sure you're going to argue me with that one, though, huh? Can you recommend good materials courses to learn more about buffer overflows? So exploit development, if we're talking books, this one's probably the king of exploit development, beginning exploit development. I'm sure somebody here is an expert reverse engineer and is going to correct me. But in terms of like just beginner stuff, this is really good. Yes, this book is lit. So for Linux, they use GDB, and they also, there's a couple of tools they can use. Most of it's done in GDB, I believe. I don't know what it stands for, something debugger. It's literally pretty much the same process in Linux. Like the concepts are the same. I just like the Windows version better because we've got a program to play with. We could build our own program for Linux, like a very, very simple one, and just overflow that too. And I actually plan on doing a course on that. How do I feel about the dude who's releasing the OSCP exam writers? I don't think it's the right way to go about it, but I don't think he's wrong, if that makes sense. OSCP is severely outdated. I don't know if releasing the exam write-ups is the right way to go, but they need to update their shit. All around, they need to update their shit. The issue is, Nidens, hey man, how's it going? The issue with OffSec is they've got nobody to pressure them to be better, if that makes sense. There's no competition. Like, eLearn Security's out there, and eLearn's great. In terms of like affordable pricing, like Sans is out there, and Sans is awesome, but if Sans is $6,000. But like when you look up OSCP on a job search, you're going to find like 900 jobs. When you look up an eLearn Security certification, you're going to find 10 jobs. So until eLearn Security, which is way more up to date and relevant, becomes an HR filter, then OSCP doesn't have to do anything. So people are still going to get their OSCP. They're just coming out of it and not knowing enough to get a job. You're learning the methodology. You're just not, my opinion, you're not learning enough to get a job. Not in today's age. Can I recommend a C book for beginners? I don't know C, man. If somebody here knows C and wants to recommend it, please feel free. Was the shellcode? The shellcode was a basic TCP reverse shell. I don't know if it's connecting over Telnet, but it's a TCP connection. If you guys want to look into shellcode generation and how that works, there's the Shellcoder's Handbook. I am not a shellcode expert by any means. Have I messed with any Hack 5 gear? I've got a bunch of gear. I've got pretty much whatever like they've put out, but the only thing I've messed with is a pineapple. I haven't I bought it and never touched it. So I haven't I've messed with the bash bunny because I was like, oh, this is cool. I can inject like PowerShell and just get a quick win or something. And it didn't work out as well as I thought. Not with any of the scripts that I was finding. It seemed like Windows Defender was actually blocking PowerShell pretty well. So the OSCE, I haven't taken it, but like if you're running on Vista and you're doing x86 architecture on Vista, and it feels like they put in the, what is it, like the XSS in the beginning just for some fluff. I don't know, that the coursework is probably like 6 or 7 years old on the OSCE. They haven't touched it since they released it. I feel like it's still on version 1. The LPT-EC Council cert. I don't know how I feel about the LPT because I don't have the LPT. I have the CEH and I wouldn't recommend that to an enemy. So I don't know. That test was booty. I didn't feel like I learned anything. And I've been laughed at in interviews for having the CEH. No offense if you have the CEH. I'm just telling the truth. How do I feel about the NSAs, that new program? I don't know how I feel about the NSAs anything. I wouldn't use it. I'm sure it's being reversed a million different ways over to see what it does, but I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. What made the stats different from the Trum when it came? It's a good question. It's how it sanitizes the input for the buffer. So the trun command wasn't sanitizing the input correctly, so it was allowing the buffer to overflow. Sorry, default user 01. I don't mean to crush your dreams if that was what you were going for. Pretty much, if you want to work in government 8570 certification, like the IA level 2 or whatever, the CEH is good. Like if you have a security clearance and you're in the US. CH is a DoD HR filter. It's very specific. Pentest Plus. I have the Pentest Plus because I took it in beta just to renew my Security Plus. It's better than the CEH. I'll give you that. Like it was actually to the point where I was concerned that I failed it. Like I know OSCP is like multiple OSCPs who failed that test. So it wasn't easy because you kind of have to like understand how to read code at like a decent level. And I feel like the OSCP doesn't really teach you how to read code at a decent level. Like it tells you how to like swap code and kind of gives you some information, but like unless you know how to read it, you're going to get stuck on the Pentest Plus. I still don't think it's a good one to go for. And I'm going to say this because if you do a job search, what are you going to find on it? We did a job search last week when we did this video. We didn't find anything. So I would point you to eLearn Security before I would point you to Pentest Plus. Do I recommend Pentester Academy? I like them. Some of their videos are dated, but I feel like a lot of them are still relevant. I'm actually working through one of their Active Directory courses right now. It's pretty good information, so I don't have any issues with Pentester Academy. I know some people that swear by them, honestly. It just hasn't been my cup of tea. I've been focused on like more mainstream certs. I don't think their certs are worth anything like on a job resume, really. I would think you're just doing them just to learn. I hear their Red Team labs are pretty good. They're just always so expensive. I've never purchased it to find out for myself. You have your CEH, you're new to the field. Advice job-wise? Depends on your background. But if you're looking to get into like pen testing, you're going to need to know the stuff we covered tonight. Like if you watch the Active Directory side of things and you feel comfortable with that and you're like, oh, I know what he's talking about, then you could probably get yourself a job. If not, you might want to go study that. Like if you got CEH, I don't know. Like I don't feel like I came out even knowing like a basic level after the CEH besides like knowing some tools. You might need to start like go look at eLearn Security and like start there. It's way more up to date. I'm sure CompTIA says the Pentest Plus is better to go for. It's their product. But I would agree that it's better to go for. In terms of like the knowledge you would need to pass the Pentest Plus, definitely. What do I think for CCNA CyberOps? I think CCNA CyberOps is new, but the thing is, everybody loves Cisco certs. And for a SOC environment, yeah, man. So the only thing I want to say is like, make sure you love Cisco, because once you start getting CCNA certifications, you're going to pigeonhole yourself into Cisco really fast. So if you like Cisco and that's like your ish, then go ahead and do it. But you don't want to get stuck doing like being a Cisco guy if you don't want to be a Cisco guy. And that shit follows you everywhere. Like I've got my CCNA and I still get asked Cisco stuff. Who uses Cisco? I don't know, like, is it like 70% of the networking? OSCP has got interviews. OSCP has got me interviews as well. It does not get you much more than a pat on the back in the interview, though. And CBT Nuggets is pretty good. If we're talking, I use them to study for the CCNA. So I don't know who's teaching the CyberOps course, if it's like Jeremy or if it's Keith, but both of them are really, really good. What certs would I go for as a pen tester? OSCP is pretty much the golden one. I mean, for now. So really, like, you want that base knowledge. OSCP is going to be your job filter. If you want current knowledge, the ECPPT from eLearn's really good. After that, if you can get a company to pay for SANS courses are good. If not, just like self-study on your own. Definitely like learn, once you have like a base level, a strong base level, you need to start learning like web app side of things. You need to start learning Active Directory side of things. These things come up. You need to learn wireless. Those things come up a lot. Like I've never had an interview where they didn't ask about wireless. It's just like a simple topic. Yeah, I agree. Like a young 20 something or even younger with the OSCP always looks good. And like, you got to be willing to find a manager that you trust, and like a job that you trust into training you. Like definitely when you're looking for a pen testing job, definitely like look for your manager, look for the position that's going to teach you and give you things. You don't want a position that's going to like just throw you to the wolves, sink or swim. Like you can learn that way, but you want like some guidance sometimes, you know? So definitely find a position and a team that you can grow with. You went to CBT Nuggets HQ. That's cool. Where's the HQ at? I passed the CCNA with CBT Nuggets mainly as like my study. I mean, I used Packet Tracer, and then I just crammed with test questions, like review questions. But I mean, it wasn't too bad. I got sent to a course for the CCNA, like a boot camp, and it was so bad that I bought CBT Nuggets. Like I didn't really get anything out of the boot camp. Eugene, Oregon, that's cool. Yeah, SANS is expensive. You got to find a company that can pay for it. Any master's programs I'd recommend? Depends what you're trying to go for. If you got like a computer science background, Georgia Tech master's is like top 5 in the country, and it's like $8K, something like that. If you're looking like the pen testing side and you've got somebody to pay for it, the SANS masters will get you with like, it's like $40K, but you get like 8 or 9 SANS certifications when you're done with it. CCNA security. The CCNA security may be helpful for doing pen testing. Like, it's not going to help you, I would say, as a pen tester. It might help you like understand like the equipment that's being used and maybe talk better, with the clients that you're dealing with. Like, if you can understand, or if you're like doing like a purple team assessment where you're working with the blue team, you might be able to explain some things with them or talk the talk. The only other thing I can see it doing is like pigeonholing you into doing what's called console assessments, where you like look at a company's Cisco, their configs, and you say, okay, this is good or this is bad, and here's the reasons why. And unless you really like looking at Cisco configs and reading through them, I wouldn't recommend doing that. So again, CCNA can pigeonhole you. How practical is knowing wireless stuff during a pen test? It's pretty practical. You got to know it for assessments. You're going to do a wireless assessment at some point. AK is dirt cheap. And like, you don't have to have a ton of computer science background. Like, you don't have to have a full-on computer science degree, like a bachelor's, to get the master's. But the master's is really hard. Like, just because it's online and it's cheap doesn't mean it's not a top 5 school that's going to make you work for it. So definitely worth looking at, especially if you can get a couple of math classes done. Like, I think they accept whatever they're called, like online credits for math classes. You can just prove that you have the background in it. Yeah, just be careful with the masters. Like, don't spend money unless you know it's going to benefit you. Degrees are expensive. You can take it from this guy. I spent way too much time in school. Congratulations. What type of keyboard do I have? I've got a Razer, I believe it's called the Black Widow Chroma. I used to be all razored out, and then I have since changed recently. They kind of made me mad. So I've got half Razer, half not Razer. So they updated their software, so some of their stuff is on like a version 2, and some of their stuff's on a version 3. So if you've got like version 2 older software, or older, I guess, hardware, then they don't coordinate the lighting with the version 3. And that really makes me mad, because they're all the same product and they were fine until they updated to that new version. So how did I like the OSWP? The OSWP is a joke. Don't do the OSWP. Save your money. It's only $400. Still save your money. Like, people ask for it on, you see like on a lot of job filters, because HR doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. That certification is 90% WEP. When's the last time you've seen WEP in an environment? And their 10% of WPA2 is capture the handshake and try to crack it. Nothing useful, nothing groundbreaking that you cannot find in an article. Sans has got a good one from what I've heard, in terms of, I think they do like Bluetooth and other types of wireless devices. Might be more worth it. Hey, thanks for the nice words, Vita. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's hard to climb out of the desk, the help desk jobs, but you can do it, man. A good and updated book for pen test. I don't like to read that much. I like to read like blogs and stuff because I have a short attention span. I think the latest one that I've heard good things about was the Hacker Playbook 3. So a lot of the books are out of date right now. There's like the how to hack books that are out there. I think they're like PowerShell focused. I forget what his name is. Starts with an S. He's got one that's called like how to hack like a porn star. 1 second. Spark Flow. I've heard good things about these books. It's pretty not well known. I think I found it on Reddit. Hey, thanks, Default. We're trying to make this a weekly thing. We did it last week. We did it this week. So hopefully 3 times the habit. We'll see how it goes. So far, the feedback's been pretty good. I hear he's doing a course on Hacker Playbook 3. I don't know much. I know somebody that just attended it, though. But they need a good book. It just takes a lot of time and effort to write a book, and it's not really financially worth it. It's more of like a, hey, I wrote a book. It feels good. I have no idea about Hack 5 and Backtrack. I don't keep up with Hack 5. Is it in person? I feel like that would be a stretch. I don't know. I would just Google the SANS Masters program and do some research on it. If you find out, let me know, because I'm not sure. But I tell you, if I had college paid for, that would be it. Why not? You come out with like, I don't know if you come out with the gold certification or not, but if you do, that's pretty damn worth it. Honestly, SANS just hikes their prices because the government pays it. So supply and demand. Thanks, Percula. I appreciate that. I have not heard about Hunix doing that. Is that Army guy in here? The one who asked earlier? If you could repeat your question, I can address it. You already asked? Sorry. He's in the Discord. Oh, snap. Are you in VetSec? If you're not in VetSec, think about VetSec. I haven't checked the Discord since the stream started. So if you're not in VetSec, that is our other project. Basically, all military veterans in some fashion of cybersecurity or trying to get into cybersecurity. The country doesn't matter. We've got a pretty diverse set of people in there. So if you've ever served and you want to join our group, we're about 430 strong, I think was the last check today. So there's quite a few people in there. Yeah, I probably should just put a link down below. Was season 3 any good for Mr. Robot? It kind of lost me after season 2. It just started getting trippy. I never went back. I feel like everybody's hyped for Game of Thrones right now. It was really good. Maybe I need to watch it then. Season 1 was really good. I was definitely indifferent on season 2.